My wife filed for divorce by email while I was deployed overseas. She emptied our joint bank account and moved her new boyfriend into our house. I calmly replied, "That's fine." By the time she realized what I had done, it was already too late. Michael sat alone in the narrow, dimly lit barracks somewhere in the heart of the Middle East. The air was thick with the familiar mix of sweat, dust, and machine oil. It was late at night, almost midnight, and most of the other soldiers were asleep or staring at their phones, desperately clinging to any connection with life back home. Michael, a staff sergeant with nearly 10 years of service under his belt, had grown used to the isolation that deployment brought. The emotional distance between him and the civilian world had always been part of the deal. But that night, something shifted. His phone buzzed softly on the metal desk beside his bed. An email notification. He wasn't expecting much, maybe. A routine message from the family readiness group, or a random spam promotion from some online store he had forgotten about. When he opened the inbox and saw the sender's name, Jennifer Miller, his wife of 8 years, his stomach tightened. The subject line was blunt. "We need to talk." For a few seconds, he just stared at it. Something inside him already knew. This wouldn't be just a casual update about the house or their dog back in Texas. He opened the email, and as he read the brief, emotionless text, a cold wave washed over him. "Michael, I filed for divorce. I've taken the money from our joint accounts. Someone else is living here now. I'm sorry, but this is how it has to be. Jennifer." That was it. No explanation, no context, no attempt to soften the blow. Michael sat motionless for several minutes. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls pressing inward, making it hard to breathe. He read the email again, slower this time, letting each sentence carve itself deeper into his mind. His fellow soldiers laughed and played cards in the background, completely oblivious to the collapse of his life happening right there on that small cracked phone screen. A part of him wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, to ask why. But none of those things happened. Instead, he inhaled deeply, set the phone down carefully on the desk, and let his mind start working. He opened a new email draft and typed only 2 words. "That's fine." After hitting send, he leaned back on his bunk and closed his eyes. What? Jennifer didn't realize what she could never understand was that Michael was not the kind of man to react emotionally when cornered. Years of military training had taught him one core principle above all others: stay calm, assess, and plan. While Jennifer was probably celebrating her newfound freedom, enjoying her nights with whoever this new person was, Michael was already mapping out every possible scenario. In that first hour, he began mentally cataloging their financial situation. The savings account, the checking account, the retirement funds, the mortgage, the car titles, the life insurance policies, every asset they had built over nearly a decade together. And she thought she could erase all of it with one email. Sitting there under the dull fluorescent light, Michael opened the secure military Wi-Fi and began logging into every shared account they had. Passwords she had never bothered to change. Bank accounts, credit cards, utilities, even her personal spending apps, all still accessible. Within minutes, he had a full digital footprint of her recent activity. She had emptied the main checking account, transferred savings into her personal account, opened a new credit card in her name, and had already made several large purchases over the past week. Clothing stores, hotel bookings, and, curiously, a jewelry store in downtown Austin. It wasn't just betrayal. Look, banal. It was premeditated financial ambush. Michael opened a new Word document on his laptop and began saving screenshots of every transaction, every balance change, every line item that painted a clearer picture of her actions. Time, stamps, IP addresses, location tags. He wasn't even angry. not in the way people usually described anger. What he felt was colder, more surgical, like something mechanical had clicked into place inside him. The same instinct that kept him alive during ambushes and roadside bombings now kicked in for this. The mission had changed. The target was different, but the objective was the same: survive and dominate. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michael began to formulate the next steps. He knew military law well enough to understand that soldiers deployed on active duty had certain legal protections, especially against financial exploitation and property disputes back home. The Service Members' Civil Relief Act. He had heard about it in briefings, but now it was more than just a PowerPoint presentation. It was his shield. Jennifer had made two critical mistakes. First, she underestimated his access to information. Second, she assumed distance meant weakness. Michael wouldn't confront her. Not with words. Not with late-night phone calls or pleading messages. No. When he moved, it would be silent and calculated. Every action he took would come from a place of absolute control. The next morning, after the routine patrol briefing, he found a quiet corner in the communications center and used a secure line to contact a civilian attorney back in Texas, one who specialized in military divorce cases. After explaining the situation briefly, the attorney advised him on the documents he would need and the first legal steps to take. Michael thanked him, ended the call, and added another task to his growing list. By the end of that week, Michael had already filed the necessary paperwork to freeze the divorce proceedings temporarily. The wheels of the legal system were now turning, slow but inevitable, grinding forward in his favor. From thousands of miles away in a dusty war zone, Michael had managed to seize control of the narrative. Jennifer, oblivious to all of this, probably believed she had delivered a final blow. What she didn't know was that the silent blow was his. And it had already landed. Michael's daily routine became a finely tuned act of balance between his military duties and the escalating legal chess game he had initiated from halfway across the world. While the sun beat mercilessly over the desert landscape and his unit moved from one operation to the next, his mind operated on two parallel fronts. One was physical survival. The other was the slow, deliberate dismantling of the life Jennifer thought she could rebuild without consequence. After securing the temporary freeze on the divorce proceedings, Michael's attorney back in Texas began filing motions and petitions on his behalf. The lawyer, a seasoned specialist in military family law, outlined a precise roadmap. There were statutes in place specifically designed to protect active duty service members from being blindsided by legal actions during deployment. The Service Members' Civil Relief Act provided Michael with a powerful legal shield. But what made this situation unique was how Jennifer had overplayed her hand by moving another man into their shared home and liquidating assets without consent. Michael received weekly updates via encrypted email from his attorney. The court had approved a motion to halt any division of property or financial dispersal until Michael returned home and could appear in person. This bought in time. Valuable time. More than that, it gave him breathing room to prepare for the full-scale legal assault he was about to unleash. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling 12-hour patrol in temperatures exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, Michael sat at his desk with a stack of printed bank statements. He reviewed them carefully, highlighting suspicious transactions and flagging any discrepancies that could suggest deliberate financial misconduct. Jennifer's spending habits had become reckless. Large withdrawals at odd hours, frequent visits to high-end retail stores, payments for home services that were never discussed before. There were even cash advances that suggested she might be trying to hide money in physical form. Michael documented everything. He created a detailed timeline, correlating each financial decision she made with key dates, like the day she sent the divorce email, the dates of her large withdrawals, and even the days when her new partner had started appearing in their home. Security logs. Although Jennifer had changed the access codes to the security system, Michael still had administrative privileges with the service provider. Another oversight on her part. Late one night, as the wind howled outside the barracks and sand whipped against the windows like tiny bullets, Michael logged into the security system and pulled the archived footage from the last 3 months. He watched silently as the unfamiliar man appeared again and again at the front door, entering with a key that Michael never authorized to exist. They laughed together in the living room, sat on the porch drinking beer, used the backyard pool he had built with his own hands during his last leave. Michael didn't feel jealousy, not in the conventional sense. What burned inside him was something far colder, an unshakable resolve to reclaim control over everything that was his. The house, the finances, even his reputation. With each new discovery, his case against Jennifer grew stronger. His attorney explained that her actions, taken while he was deployed, constituted not just a breach of trust, but a potential case of marital fraud and financial misconduct. These weren't small, private infractions that could be settled quietly. They were offenses with legal consequences, especially under Texas state law, which had specific clauses about protecting deployed service members from predatory financial behavior. Meanwhile, Jennifer remained unaware of the storm building behind the scenes. Michael's attorney had instructed him not to communicate directly with her anymore. Everything would go through legal channels. No text messages, no calls, no emails. Silence was now his most effective weapon. The first time Jennifer became aware that things weren't as simple as she imagined was when a certified letter arrived at the house, addressed to her. The letter outlined the court's decision to freeze all marital assets pending further review. Additionally, it notified her that any further attempts to sell, transfer, or hide share property would be met with legal action. 2 days later, a second letter arrived. This time, it came from the bank. The joint account she had drained was now under investigation for unauthorized activity. Her personal account had been flagged for review as well, given that it contained funds previously belonging to both of them. Jennifer's access to online banking services was suspended temporarily, pending the outcome of the inquiry. The panic began to set in. Michael received word of her reaction through a mutual friend, Tyler, a former neighbor who still lived on their street. Tyler had called Michael's lawyer, asking if Michael was aware that Jennifer had been calling around, trying to find out why her accounts were frozen and why she had been served with court documents. Michael instructed the attorney to relay a simple message through Tyler if necessary. Michael was fully aware, and everything was proceeding according to plan. Back at the base, Michael's focus sharpened. In his spare moments between missions, he began drafting a personal statement for the court, detailing not just the financial betrayal, but the emotional impact of discovering that his wife had dismantled their life together while he risked his own abroad. The statement wasn't dramatic. It was factual, chronological, and devastatingly precise. On one rare day off, Michael found a quiet corner of the base and sat with a legal assistant provided by the military's legal services office. Together, they reviewed every piece of evidence he had collected: screenshots, bank statements, security footage logs, email correspondences, and even text messages she had sent him prior to the divorce notice. The assistant helped organize the files into a comprehensive digital portfolio to be submitted as part of the upcoming court proceedings. As the days passed, Jennifer's desperation grew more visible. She began reaching out to friends, asking them to intervene on her behalf, hoping someone would convince Michael to ease up. She left voicemails, sent indirect messages through social media, and even wrote an old-fashioned letter, which Michael's lawyer intercepted and advised him not to open. Michael stayed silent. From time to time, in the quiet moments between missions, he allowed himself to reflect on the emotional aspect of it all. The years they had spent together, the plans they had made for the future, the way she'd smiled at him when he left for deployment, as if she would be waiting when he returned. But every time those thoughts surfaced, he buried them under the weight of what she had done. This wasn't about lost love anymore. It was about justice and setting a precedent. Jennifer had made her decisions without thinking about the consequences. Now, she would face them all. Michael's attorney finalized the next round of motions, a formal request for a temporary restraining order against further financial tampering, and a petition for Jennifer to provide a full sworn accounting of all money withdrawn from their accounts since the date of his deployment. A court date was set for 6 weeks after Michael's expected return stateside. As Michael stood on the dusty tarmac, boarding the transport plane that would carry him back to the United States, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. His mission overseas had ended, but the real battle, the one that truly mattered, was only just beginning. Jennifer had no idea how prepared he was, and Michael had every intention of seeing this through to the very end. The day Michael landed back on American soil was clear and cool, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat he had left behind in the Middle East. The military transport plane touched down at the base in San Antonio just after 8 o'clock in the morning. After disembarking and completing the necessary debriefings, Michael grabbed his single duffel bag and made his way to the long-term parking lot where his truck had been sitting untouched for months. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he paused, letting his hands rest on the steering wheel. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes and let the familiarity of home settle over him. The air smelled different here, cleaner, cooler, but the weight in his chest remained, rather than heading straight back to the house he once called home. Michael drove to a small, extended-stay hotel on the outskirts of the city. The room was modest but clean, with a simple desk, a bed, and just enough space for him to organize the next phase of his plan. That afternoon, he met face-to-face with his attorney for the first time. The office was located in a modest commercial building downtown, with worn leather chairs and shelves stacked with legal books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Michael sat across from the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Matthews, who had built a reputation for handling high-conflict military divorces. Linda pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on the table between them. "Your case has grown stronger by the day," she said, flipping through the paperwork. "Our financial records, the cohabitation with another partner, and the unauthorized withdrawal of funds during your deployment, all of it paints a very clear picture." Michael nodded, silently absorbing the information. "We're filing for an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning," Linda continued. "We're asking for 3 things. An immediate injunction to block her from accessing or selling any remaining assets, a temporary possession order for the house in your favor, and a court-mandated forensic audit of all marital accounts." Michael didn't hesitate. "Do it." Before leaving her office, Linda handed him a packet of documents to review and sign. As he worked through the pages, initialing and signing where needed, a quiet determination settled in him. This was no longer about hurt feelings or emotional betrayal. It was a tactical operation, and Michael intended to execute it with the same precision he brought to every mission. The following morning, Linda filed the emergency motion. By noon, a judge had reviewed the case file and issued a temporary restraining order against Jennifer. That same afternoon, a process server arrived at the front door of Michael's house, delivering a thick envelope directly into Jennifer's hands. The server's report later noted that Jennifer appeared visibly confused and distressed upon receiving the documents. That evening, back at his hotel room, Michael sat by the window, looking out at the city lights while reading a new email from Linda. "She's called my office 3 times today." The email read, left 2 voicemails, both emotional. She claimed she didn't realize what she was doing would cause this much trouble. Michael set the phone down without replying. Over the next 2 days, Michael's legal position strengthened her. The forensic accountant hired by Linda began examining Jennifer's financial activities. Preliminary findings revealed that not only had she drained the joint accounts, but she had also opened a high-interest credit card in Michael's name while he was deployed, maxing it out with charges that included expensive dinners, hotel stays, and even a short trip to Las Vegas. When Linda called Michael with this latest discovery, he felt his jaw tighten but forced himself to stay calm. "This gives us grounds for a fraud charge," she said. "Proceed," Michael answered simply. While the legal gears turned, Michael remained out of Jennifer's sight. He stayed at the hotel, kept a low profile, and waited. The element of surprise remained crucial. Jennifer had spent months believing she held all the power. Now, with each passing day, that illusion crumbled. 2 days before the scheduled court hearing, Michael drove past his old neighborhood. He parked a few streets away and walked toward the house under cover of night, stopping where the tree line provided just enough concealment to observe without being seen. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, he could see Jennifer, pacing back and forth, talking animatedly on the phone. There was no sign of the man she had moved in with. Michael wondered briefly if he was still in the picture or if the escalating legal pressure had driven him away. The night before the hearing, Linda called Michael one last time to review the strategy. "In court tomorrow, we're going to emphasize 3 points," she said. "Your deployment status, her financial misconduct, and the fact that she exposed the marital home to an unrelated third party without your consent." Michael listened carefully, asking questions only when necessary. The next morning, he dressed in a crisp, dark suit and drove to the courthouse. As he stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, he saw Jennifer for the first time in nearly a year. She looked different. Tired, paler than he remembered. Her eyes darted nervously around the hallway before settling on him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she took a hesitant step toward him. "Michael, can we please talk before this starts?" Her voice trembled. He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge her presence. Instead, he turned to Linda, who was standing nearby with a folder tucked under her arm, and said, "Let's go." They entered the courtroom together. During the hearing, Linda presented the meticulously compiled evidence, timelines, bank records, credit card statements, and testimony from the forensic accountant. Michael sat silently, watching as Jennifer squirmed in her seat. When the judge asked her to respond, she stammered through half-hearted explanations about loneliness and emotional stress, insisting she hadn't intended to harm him financially. But the documentation was overwhelming. The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s, listened carefully and then delivered her ruling. Michael was granted temporary exclusive possession of the house. Jennifer and any other unauthorized occupants were ordered to vacate the property within 72 hours. Furthermore, she was required to provide a full financial disclosure within 10 business days, detailing the use of all funds withdrawn from their accounts. The judge also approved a motion for restitution, meaning Jennifer would likely have to repay a significant portion of the money she had taken. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the hearing, Michael rose from his seat and walked past Jennifer without a word. Outside the courtroom, Linda clapped him gently on the shoulder. "That went as well as it possibly could have." Michael nodded, but remained silent. There was still more to come. As he left the courthouse and stepped into the bright afternoon sun, Michael allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Not because it was over, but because, for the first time since receiving that email in the desert, the balance of power had shifted. And now, He intended to press his advantage at every turn. Jennifer spent the next 72 hours in a state of frantic disbelief. The court order had arrived like a sledgehammer, shattering what little composure she had left. She barely slept, pacing from room to room, pulling clothes from drawers and stuffing them into suitcases with trembling hands. The new man in her life, Jason, had already begun to distance himself the moment she called him after the court. Hearing, "It's getting too messy," Jason had said during their last conversation. His voice, which once carried promises of adventure and freedom, now sounded cold and final. "I'm not getting dragged into this." By the time Jennifer hung up the phone, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Her support system had evaporated. Overnight, friends she thought would take her side became silent, avoiding her calls and leaving her messages on read. Word had begun to spread through the neighborhood. Tyler, the neighbor across the street, now barely nodded when she passed by. She noticed curtains shifting when she walked outside, people peeking without wanting to be seen. The same neighbors, who had once invited her over for cookouts and holiday parties, now treated her like a pariah. The 72-hour countdown felt both long and short. On the morning of the third day, Jennifer stood at the front door, staring at the 2 suitcases she had managed to fill. She had left so much behind: furniture, decorations, electronics, all things she thought she would never have to part with. When the moving van arrived, it wasn't for her benefit. It was Michael's. By court order, he was entitled to regain possession of the house immediately after her departure. Jennifer stood on the sidewalk as the movers, hired by Michael's attorney, unloaded cleaning equipment and tools meant to assess any damage done during her occupancy. Michael did not appear that day. He stayed away by design, letting professionals handle the transition while he remained focused on the next phase of the legal process. Jennifer watched as locksmiths changed the locks on every door. A cleaning crew arrived shortly after, carrying industrial-grade equipment. Everything she had left inside would be inventoried and held in storage until the property division was finalized. Homeless and with limited access to her own bank accounts due to the ongoing financial investigation, Jennifer checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew. The peeling wallpaper and stained carpet only added to her growing sense of isolation and dread. That night, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, Jennifer tried calling Michael. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Finally, she sent a text message, typing slowly with trembling fingers. "Michael, please, can we talk? I didn't mean for it to get like this." The message remained unread. Days turned into weeks. The financial audit progressed, uncovering more damaging evidence against her. The credit card she had opened in Michael's name became a central piece of the case, especially the unauthorized transactions that included airfare and hotel stays. For trips she had taken with Jason, the forensic accountant traced each expense, compiling a report that left little room for defense. Michael's attorney filed a motion for restitution, demanding Jennifer repay every dollar spent from the joint account and the unauthorized credit card. The motion also sought punitive damages for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, serious accusations that could have long-term financial and legal repercussions. A court summons arrived at Jennifer's motel room 2 weeks later. She was required to appear for a formal deposition where she would have to answer under oath for her financial decisions over the past year. On the day of the deposition, Jennifer sat in a cold, sterile conference room surrounded by Michael's legal team. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to record every word. Linda, Michael's attorney, began the questioning. "Mrs. Miller, were you aware that opening a line of credit in your husband's name without his consent constitutes identity theft under state and federal law?" Jennifer's voice wavered. I didn't think of it like that. I was desperate. Desperate enough to spend over $12,000 on personal vacations and luxury items? I didn't mean to, Linda cut her off. Yes. Or no, Mrs. Miller. Did you make those purchases? Jennifer's shoulders sagged. Yes. The questions continued for over 2 hours. Every lie she had told, every excuse she had made, now stood exposed under the cold glare of legal procedure. By the end, Jennifer's voice was barely more than a whisper. When the deposition concluded, Linda closed her folder and addressed her one final time. I suggest you get a good attorney. Mrs. Miller, you're going to need one. The following week, Jennifer received a formal notice of the court's preliminary ruling on the financial audit. The judge had found substantial evidence of fraud and financial misconduct. Pending the final divorce trial, Jennifer's wages, any employment income she received, and any future tax returns would be subject to garnishment to begin repaying the debt owed to Michael. Her motel stay became indefinite. Without access to meaningful funds, she struggled to pay even for that. Calls to friends and family went unanswered. Even her parents, who had initially expressed sympathy, now kept their distance. They had heard about the credit card fraud and the unauthorized withdrawal of marital assets. The weight of public opinion had turned against her completely. One evening, while sitting alone with a half-empty bottle of cheap wine, Jennifer scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and Michael during better times, vacations, family gatherings, random moments of laughter. She lingered on one particular photo taken just days before his last deployment. They were standing in front of the house, arms around each other, smiling at a future they both believed in back then. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of the memory. It was a new email. She opened it, heart racing, hoping for some kind of reprieve. But it was another formal notification from the court, informing her of the upcoming trial date for final division of assets and ruling on punitive damages. Jennifer closed the email, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The cracks in the paint above her seemed to widen the longer she looked. Her world had narrowed to a single point: survival. Meanwhile, Michael continued moving forward with quiet determination. Now back in his home, he walked through each room, inspecting for damage. There were stains on the carpet, small scratches on the walls, and a few broken fixtures, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Standing in the living room, he took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The house felt different, but at least it was his again. He opened the back door, stepped onto the porch, and let the cool Texas evening air wash over him. The fall was in progress. Jennifer's carefully constructed illusion of control had crumbled. The financial penalties were only the beginning. Michael knew there was still one more phase left before he could finally close this chapter of his life. The final trial loomed ahead, and with it, the promise of true closure. The morning of the final court hearing arrived with a cool breeze sweeping through the streets of downtown Austin. Michael stood in front of his bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting his tie. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the months of emotional weight that had pressed down on him. The furniture had been rearranged, the carpets cleaned, and most of Jennifer's lingering presence erased. There were still small reminders of the past, like the faint scuff marks near the baseboards and the lingering scent of her old perfume in the closet, but they were just that, reminders. Ghosts of decisions already made. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Michael sat in the lobby of the courthouse with Linda by his side, reviewing the day's agenda. The room was filled with others waiting for their cases to be called. Couples whispering anxiously, lawyers flipping through case files, and clerks carrying stacks of paperwork from room to room. Michael sat silently, his expression unreadable. "Today's the end of this," Linda said, her voice low and steady. "We've submitted everything: the financial audit, the testimony from the deposition, The fraud charges. You've got one of the strongest cases I've ever seen. Michael nodded, keeping his focus on the hallway where Jennifer would soon appear. When she finally arrived, she looked almost unrecognizable. Gone was the confident woman who had sent him that email so many months ago. In her place stood someone visibly worn down by stress, lack of sleep, and financial ruin. Her hair, once styled meticulously, hung limp around her face. The clothes she wore were plain, wrinkled, and mismatched, as if picked hastily from whatever was clean enough for court. Jennifer caught sight of Michael and froze for a brief second. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but then she lowered her gaze and shuffled past him into the courtroom without a word. Inside, the room felt sterile and cold. Rows of wooden benches lined the back, while the judge's bench stood, elevated at the front. The same judge who had overseen the earlier hearings presided today. The bailiff called the case number, and both parties were instructed to approach. Michael remained composed as Linda presented the final arguments. She spoke clearly, detailing Jennifer's violations: unauthorized withdrawals, fraudulent credit lines, the breach of fiduciary responsibility, and the introduction of a non-marital partner into the shared home without consent. The forensic accountant's report was entered into the record, leaving no room for doubt regarding the extent of Jennifer's financial misconduct. When it was Jennifer's turn to respond, her voice barely rose above a whisper. She apologized repeatedly, stumbling over her words, trying to frame her actions as misguided rather than malicious. She spoke of loneliness, poor judgment, and emotional distress, but none of it carried weight against the sheer volume of documented evidence. The judge listened patiently before delivering her final ruling. Michael was awarded full and permanent ownership of the house. Jennifer was ordered to pay restitution for the funds she had taken, including the full balance of the credit card she had fraudulently opened in his name. In addition, punitive damages were imposed to cover legal fees and compensate for the emotional and financial distress caused by her actions. The total judgment against her exceeded $70,000, a sum that would take her years to repay. Furthermore, the judge imposed wage garnishment until the debt was satisfied in full. Any future tax returns or government refunds due to Jennifer would be intercepted to fulfill the judgment. Jennifer stood silently as the judge read the ruling. There were no tears left to shed, only the hollow expression of someone who had run out of options. After court adjourned, Jennifer remained in her seat for several minutes while others filed out of the room. Michael didn't wait. He gathered his papers, thanked Linda for her unwavering dedication, and walked out of the courtroom without glancing back. Outside, the air felt warmer, the sky clearer. Michael exhaled slowly, as if releasing months of tension all at once. Linda caught up with him near the courthouse steps. "It's over," she said simply. Michael gave a small nod. "Yeah, it is." He drove back to his house with the windows down, letting the breeze wash over him as he navigated the familiar streets. When he pulled into the driveway, he sat for a moment behind the wheel, taking in the quiet neighborhood. Children played down the street. A neighbor mowed his lawn. Life, it seemed, had gone on without pause. Inside the house, Michael walked from room to room, absorbing the stillness. The emptiness that Jennifer had left behind no longer felt like a void. It felt like space waiting to be filled with something new, something better. In the following weeks, Michael focused on rebuilding. He accepted a promotion within his unit that required relocation to another state. The idea of a fresh start felt more appealing than ever. Within a month, he sold the house, using the proceeds to pay off lingering debts and secure a down payment on a new home near his new base. Jennifer, meanwhile, struggled to keep her life afloat. With her wages garnished and her credit score in ruins, she bounced from one temporary job to another. She rented a small apartment far from the neighborhood. they had once called home. Friends she once relied on now kept their distance. The stigma of her actions followed her everywhere she went. Occasionally, late at night, she would scroll through her phone, rereading the single response Michael had sent her months earlier, the two words that haunted her more than any legal ruling or financial penalty. That's fine. She had expected anger. She had braced for arguments, insults, or desperate pleas. What she had never anticipated was silence. Michael's unwavering refusal to engage, to argue, or even to acknowledge her existence had become the most punishing consequence of all. In her quieter moments, Jennifer wondered what might have happened if she had made different choices. If she had waited for him to come home. If she had talked to him instead of making unilateral decisions that destroyed everything they had built. But regret, she realized too late, offered no shelter. For Michael, life moved forward with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. The day he left Texas for his new assignment, he packed the last of his belongings into his truck and drove away without looking back. There were no lingering doubts. No unanswered questions, only the quiet, steady satisfaction of knowing he had reclaimed his life on his own terms. And through it all, he had never raised his voice, never pleaded, never engaged in emotional warfare. He had let the silence do the work, and in the end, it had been enough.